If there is one thing Monster Hunter is known for, it's its excellent boss and creature design. From Chicken to Chungus, Drome to Dragon of the Apocalypse, the series has an incredible roster of memorable and awesome monsters. But one aspect of these creatures that's not as well known is the behind-the-scenes story of their designs. How did the Monhun team end up with some of these monsters? What inspired their creation? What purpose were they built for? Luckily, Capcom has released various Monster Hunter books that give us some answers to exactly those questions. For example, let's look at Dive to Iceborne, which is the lore and design book describing everything related to Monster Hunter World Iceborne. This massive tome is a treasure trove of lore, ecology, and, yes, developer notes, and it is also only available in Japanese, like most Monster Hunter books. This is especially unfortunate because this book contains production notes on each monster by Kaname Fujioka, director of Monster Hunter 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as executive director of Monster Hunter World and the upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds. Because hearing a dev team member with such a profound impact on the series talk about monster design is just so cool, I decided to transcribe and translate these production notes for everyone to enjoy. I've been posting them to Twitter, Reddit, and Blue Sky for a while now, but I figured they'd fit nicely into a video for y'all if you would prefer just listening to them. So, I present to you Kaname Fujioka's monster production notes on the Iceborne roster. One note per monster. Let's go. Beotodus, a new tutorial monster that teaches the importance of elemental damage. Monster Hunter World Iceborne was planned to bring in many returning monsters, but since this is a story about an expedition heading to a new land, I wanted the first monster the players meet to be a new one. Also, in order to expand on Monster Hunter World, we wanted the game design of Monster Hunter World Iceborne to emphasize elemental damage as a playstyle, with players selecting the right element to maximize their damage on each monster. So we decided to have players encounter a new monster that specializes in the ice element, to make a strong first impression on players. The ability of Beotodus to bury into the snow was also a great introduction to the new locale, the Hoarfrost Reach. So we built a monster based on the mud-dwelling Giratodus, but made the terrain a little easier to move around in. However, although it can be defeated quite easily if you can use the Clutch Claw, it seems that many players struggled because it was their first experience with Master Rank, and its movements were a bit tricky. I myself remember forgetting to have cold resistance when I hopped into a hunt for it, and having a terrible time. Banbaro, designed to easily interact with players and monsters through simple movements. Since it appears early on in the story, we gave it a simple forward charge as a main attack, to make it a good opportunity to train and experiment with new mechanics such as the Clutch Claw. Another reason for its simplicity is its habitat. While it mostly appears in the Hoarfrost Reach, I wanted to create a simple monster that could appear and fit in anywhere. So the idea for the Banbaro emerged very early in development. In Monster Hunter World, turf wars between monsters and the player's choice to either avoid them or use them to their advantage was a big factor, so for the expansion, we wanted to have a monster with simple attacks that could easily interact with the rest of the roster. If the monster that appears everywhere is too mechanically complex, it becomes tedious to deal with and hard to manage on a technical level, so I thought that if it is a monster with simple movement that charges recklessly, it will be easy to handle even when it interacts with other monsters, being likewise easier to implement on the developer's end. However, charging alone isn't enough, and since Monster Hunter World places importance on the environment and ecology, I made it so that the Banbaro's charge changes depending on what its horns hook into, depending on the map it's currently on. Viper Tobi-Kadachi, afflicting players with ailments and displaying 3-dimensional mobility on flat terrain. While wanting players to enjoy the story, I also wanted to smoothly teach them about ailments as they progress. That's why Viper Tobi-Kadachi appears around the same point as Nightshade Paolumu. They serve as tutorial monsters for abnormal conditions, reminding players who have reached Master Rank and may have just forgotten about them. The Viper Tobi-Kadachi is a monster that teaches players to deal with poison and paralysis properly. What I wanted to do with the Viper Tobi-Kadachi was to create interesting movements, such as having its tail face the player, or making it use its membrane to take to the air for a short bit and circle towards the player rather than rushing at them directly. Essentially, we wanted to make it a monster that uses 3-dimensional maneuvering even on a flat surface. This was actually an idea that inspired the design of the original Tobi-Kadachi, but as it was in the ancient forest, trees were incorporated into its movement. Since the Hoarfrost Reach has basically no trees aside from the southern area, I felt it would be interesting to develop this design further with the subspecies. Nightshade Paolumu, a sleep-focused monster with easy-to-understand countermeasures. Like the Viper Tobi-Kadachi, the Nightshade Paolumu tests how well the player deals with ailments. Like the normal species, it inhales air and floats, so its movements seem leisurely at first glance, but it controls the special sleep breath it sets by flapping its wings and sucking in air, so if you are not careful, it will put you to sleep and cause you some trouble. In that sense, the countermeasure is easy to understand. Equip sleep immunity and the fight is essentially won already. The Nightshade Paolumu itself doesn't have many tricks up its sleeve, but will punish players that enter the fight unprepared harshly by dousing them in sleep gas and incapacitating them repeatedly. As for the design, the pattern on its inflated neck sac was meant to look like eyes, with its actual head forming a sort of beak. In short, we wanted it to look like a large-headed bird. The Nightshade Paolumu is timid, so it makes up for it through this threat display. This timidness can also be seen in its intro cutscene, where it does not attack the player, but rather just puts them to sleep and leaves. Coral Pukei-Pukei, a monster whose skillful water attacks make players dread getting hit. This monster was born from the desire to make players worry about the consequences of water blight and encourage stamina management. The regular species swallows nuts to enhance its poison spit, making it a technical monster whose abilities depend on its environment. For the subspecies, we wanted to retain that, so we made the Coral Pukei-Pukei use land corals as a water source. It is a monster that excels at maintaining a water supply and weaponizing it through skillful attacks. By the way, the water it spits out is simply the water it absorbs. It cannot generate water internally, so it shrinks when it uses it up. We also gave it more direct physical attacks than the regular species has. Many of these moves were actually attacks that we had intended to give to the regular Pukei-Pukei back in Monster Hunter World, but since that monster is fought very early, we had to hold back. In a sense, the Coral Pukei-Pukei was an opportunity for us to fully realize the potential we originally envisioned for this monster. Barioth. Aggressive, 3-dimensional attacks that form a difficulty spike players must overcome. At this point in the game, we wanted a monster that signaled the end of the subspecies and the start of the returning monsters, as well as an increase in difficulty. We knew that we wanted this to be a major wall for player progression and force them to rethink their gear. Barioth was chosen because it is popular and because it fits perfectly into the Hoarfrost Reach. Additionally, it being a monster with a freezing breath makes it function as a narrative red herring, misleading players to believe it might be the cause for the frozen monsters seen in the story. As for its movements, we wanted it to be more ferocious and brutish than Nargacuga, but still emphasize a degree of finesse. So we expanded on the 3-dimensional leaps it had in previous games, and made it especially dangerous near walls. This way, the fight also naturally becomes harder at the end, when it transitions into the caves where walls are abundant. In terms of design, we decided to give its skeletal structure a general overhaul, focusing on consistency, especially in the structure of its spikes and claws. Nargacuga, our original design versus our desire to refine its realism. We wanted the player to take a break from the Hoarfrost Reach, and have them check in on the other maps in Master Rank. As we were brainstorming ways to amaze players upon their return, we landed on the idea of introducing a monster that could rival the apex of the ancient forest. We realized then that this would be even cooler if this interloper was a returning monster of similar strength and status. Thus, we decided to include Nargacuga. The design of the fight has remained largely unchanged. The Nargacuga uses quick jumps to constantly reposition itself around the player, who must be especially wary of its powerful tail slams. We just added the bleed status into the mix for that extra spice. Other than that, Nargacuga received the same realistic overhaul all Monster Hunter World monsters got. We were particularly happy with how its head movements turned out, having it look at the player menacingly even as it prowls sideways. This monster was also a way for us to show off our new HD approach to fur. As soon as we decided on including Nargacuga, our team kept saying, "We are going to make it look so fluffy." Glavenus, a returning monster whose tail attacks are infamous among Monster Hunter Generations fans. We were aware that at this point in time, many fans of Monster Hunter may have first started with Monster Hunter Generations and Generations Ultimate, so we wanted to include a monster they would recognize. There were 4 flagship monsters in Monster Hunter Generations, but since it was impossible to include them all, we chose Glavenus. The reason it was chosen was that we wanted a monster whose strength would be immediately apparent at first glance to all players, and its massive tail communicates its threat in one simple visual cue. In terms of its fight, the main change compared to Monster Hunter Generations is that we made Glavenus use its tail more frequently and aggressively. We wanted to really highlight this physical feature, and we also ended up reducing the prominence of its fire breath for that same reason. With such a large tail and consequently wide attack animations, we knew he'd be a pain to fight in anything but a wide open space, so we chose the Wildspire Waste as his main locale. In its Monster Hunter Generations cutscene, a Glavenus is seen fighting a Rathian, and since Rathian also inhabits the Wildspire Waste, we chose to reference that moment in Glavenus' intro in Monster Hunter World. It all worked out rather well in the end. Tigrex, creating a charge attack that works even on complex terrain. When pacing out the returning monsters, we wanted them to gradually increase in difficulty and be situated on different maps, starting with Nargacuga in the Ancient Forest. Tigrex and Brachydios were introduced later because we know that players struggle with them, so we had to plan carefully who would appear where. Luckily, Tigrex has always been depicted as appearing in many different environments, so we could put it in the Rotten Vale without any issues. It eats anything after all, no matter how gross. As with all returning monsters, we wanted to retain Tigrex's essence. It is a monster that charges at players brutally. Our focus was to give these charge attacks the signature Monster Hunter World treatment. Maps are more complex now, with uneven terrain, so Tigrex couldn't just charge in a perfectly straight line anymore. We spent a lot of time fine-tuning its ability to find a path and avoid walls, until it could easily chase players across all possible maps without any trouble. This was based on some of the work we did for Monster Hunter 4, but our goal was to make a complete Tigrex this time, one that could traverse all terrains. Brachydios, spicing up the gameplay of the slime mold to create a bullfight-style encounter. Both in design and difficulty, Brachydios stands out among the returning monsters. We knew that it might be a tad strong for the point in the game it is fought at, but we were dedicated to not making his fight any easier. The core feeling we wanted to retain was that of a bullfight, where one mistake in positioning can instantly cost you your life. We wanted to mainly add to the fight by making the slime mold more dangerous, for example by making the Brachydios use the slime on its head more often. The focus is still on the monster using its impressive arms to lay traps and swing at hunters, but the addition of more head moves increases the monster's flexibility. We also gave the mold new ways to spread and develop as the fight goes on. As far as the Brachydios ecology is concerned, we didn't have any major changes in mind. One difference is that the slime mold seems more powerful in Monster Hunter World, which we thought would be the result of Brachydios being exposed to the bioenergy within the Elder's Recess and its crystals. Though, if we ever do include this monster in future games, we'll probably retain the changes we made in Monster Hunter World, even without the Elder's Recess influencing its ecology. Life is ever evolving, after all. Shrieking Legiana, a cold climate variant designed to be a direct upgrade to the regular Legiana. This is just an upgraded version of Legiana, stronger and better in very simple ways. The regular Legiana has the ability to freeze cold air around it and weaponize it, so the Shrieking Legiana is constantly displaying this power with ease. It is an adaptation born from living in the hinterlands and adapting to them. While we obviously wanted to imply that Shrieking Legiana have inhabited this area for a long time, we also wanted to leave it ambiguous if the regular version originated from here as well. Speaking of that, we chose to kickstart the story with Legiana migration because this monster really fit the idea of Iceborne. But there was another reason as well. Seeing the lonesome apex monster of the Coral Highlands suddenly appear as a flock in the ancient forest would naturally evoke a sense of intrigue due to how unusual it would seem. By contrast, if we had done the same scene with a horde of Pukei-Pukei, well, it might have looked cute, but who would have cared enough to investigate that mystery? Fulgur Anjanath, creating a thunder-based subspecies without losing the original appeal of Anjanath. When we were planning to include numerous subspecies in Iceborne, we wanted to really leave an impression on new players and teach them the meaning of the word subspecies. To do that, we focused on giving the subspecies new elements and ailments to make their new abilities as obvious as possible. When we were developing this part of the game, we noticed that it could use more thunder monsters, and since the Anjanath is a simple design with plenty of room for expansion, we chose it to receive a thunder subspecies. Besides that, we also wanted it to be able to appear anywhere, like Banbaro. One rule, however, was that we would not give it outrageous abilities like calling down thunder strikes. We wanted this subspecies to retain the core of the original Anjanath, so instead, it uses the thunder element to enhance its muscles and electrify its mucus. That way, it still feels like an Anjanath fight, but with the added danger and flair of lightning. Personally, I think we succeeded at incorporating thunder attacks into the fight without losing the grounded appeal of the Anjanath. Acidic Glavenus, a brand new subspecies whose fight revolves around its tail. The reason we made a subspecies of Glavenus was to surprise players who had made it this far. When it comes to subspecies, it's easy to settle into a flow where a regular monster's inclusion in a game often announces the possibility of its subspecies appearing as well. But since Iceborne included so many returning monsters, their subspecies inclusions would have run the risk of feeling uninteresting to longtime fans. So, we decided to include a brand new subspecies of a familiar face into the mix to keep things fresh. For the Acidic Glavenus, we moved away from the regular species flame attacks with wide areas of effect, and instead focused on precise and deadly tail attacks. We wanted players to enjoy a fight that is all about close combat, dodging and anticipating physical attacks, and keeping track of the two tail modes, crystallized and sharp. If we imagined the regular Glavenus as a great sword wielder, then we wanted an acidic Glavenus hunt to feel like fighting a longsword user. It is skilled at slashing and stabbing, with precise and rapid attacks that put a lot of pressure on players to learn how to read the tail, which is where the fun emerges. We wanted it to be a monster for people who enjoy mastering positioning in Monster Hunter. Ebony Odogaron, a subspecies with the rare dragon element, pushes players to suppress its power. The normal Odogaron was designed to get stronger by eating meat, but players kept slaying it before it had the chance to do that, so it rarely got to show its true power. So for the subspecies, we flipped the concept on its head. Ebony Odogaron starts at full power, and it's up to the player to suppress its abilities and weaken it. We wanted to keep the fierce combos and brutality that the original normal species had, so we added various dragon element attacks to enhance the pressure on players. We also wanted players to think about how to avoid Dragon Blight. These thoughts combined into the idea that the player could suppress Ebony Odogaron's power and aggression by hitting the head with elemental damage. That way, the natural tension of the fight would revolve around not having your elements be disabled by Dragon Blight. This also left the door open for raw damage players to attempt to brute force the fight without worrying about weakening the monster. It's rare for a subspecies to use the dragon element, so we wanted this fight to be especially memorable. Why does it have the dragon element? Well, it eats just about anything, so it must have some incredible substance in its stomach that grants it power, I think. Velkhana, a frost dragon whose design pushed us to understand what makes a monster Monster Hunter-like. We began with the idea of creating a frost dragon that fits into Monster Hunter. The previous flagship was Nergigante, a brutish warrior, so we wanted to make Velkhana in the image of a mage for contrast. However, the production staff pointed out to me that having a flagship monster that only attacks from afar with spells would probably not feel satisfying enough to fight. Thus, we gave Velkhana a few physical moves as well, such as the tail stab. Through iterating on this, we managed to land on a balance of close and ranged combat that we felt was satisfying to engage in. Design-wise, I wanted Velkhana to look like a witch, beautiful at a glance, but able to reveal a dangerous and threatening side, so I asked for concept art that matched this. There was this idea floating around of it being able to produce ice out of thin air like magic, but we agreed that this would not fit into Monster Hunter. I personally really liked the idea of Velkhana creating ice walls and dropping icicles though, so I pushed to find a way to make this idea feel more Monster Hunter-like. That's when we landed on the concept of supercooled water, an unstable liquid that can rapidly freeze and crystallize. By scattering this liquid around itself and stimulating it with cold air, Velkhana could indeed create ice in a manner that seems near magical. So, through various iterations, our ideas about a mage-like frost dragon came together in the end. Seething Bazelgeuse, a redesign that emphasizes predictable patterns and movements, to contrast its previous form. Bazelgeuse was originally created to add some chaos to Monster Hunter World, so it was an inherently unpredictable gameplay experience. So, for Seething Bazelgeuse, we designed a more predictable fight that players could learn and master. We chose to add moves such as its Seething Explosion, Tail Swipes, etc. to add more variety to the encounter. Also, while it still drops its explosive scales like the regular version, they now fall at set times during specific attack animations, pushing the player to learn to predict them. Regular Bazelgeuse's scales dropped at random, so we thought that for the variant, a more distinct pattern might make for an interesting alternate Bazelgeuse fight. In terms of design, we wanted to highlight a sense of broiling hot energy, so we initially just increased the orange glow effect of the regular version. But that just looked creepy. We figured it was too over the top, so we adjusted the colors until we landed on the final white-hot look. Blackveil Vaal Hazak, a walking fortress that commands spores and stalks the ancient forest. We included this variant right after Seething Bazelgeuse to keep the momentum up after the subspecies marathon and subsequent showdown with Velkhana. We could have just placed previously seen Elder Dragons, such as Kushala Daora, right here, but that would have been repetitive after they already appeared in Monster Hunter World. So, what monster could fit this point in the story? Our idea was the same as with the acidic Glavenus. Make an entirely new variation of monster, one that stands apart from other variants and subspecies. So, we decided to create a variant for Vaal Hazak that upgrades and enhances many of its abilities. Vaal Hazak, Lord of the Rotten Vale, adapted to the lush ancient forest? I figured that just this concept alone would make a strong impression of walking into a nightmare. For gameplay, our core idea was that of a walking fortress. It emits effluvium, but moves slowly, and shoots spores like the cannons installed on fortresses and battleships. Beyond that, any of its spore sacs can inflate and explode, making it a powerful foe indeed. Namielle, the first water elder dragon, made possible by modern gaming hardware. We made Namielle because until now, there hadn't really ever been a dedicated water element elder dragon. Due to hardware limitations, we had not been able to properly depict water in a way that would do an elder dragon justice. Therefore, early on in the development of Iceborne, we decided to include another new elder dragon besides Velkhana, and to base it around the water element. Before long, we had a concept of a dragon that spewed and controlled massive amounts of water. However, that alone didn't make for exciting gameplay, so we explored other ideas as well. We did, however, strongly feel that this monster's main mechanic should still revolve around controlling water. To add some variety, we included some electric attacks to allow the water to vaporize into damaging steam explosions. This conjured images of an electric eel. Inspired by this, and wishing to create a monster that looked strong, we eventually finalized a design reminiscent of a deep-sea fish. I'm personally fond of the way the wing membranes turned out. Combined with the mollusk-like movement, Namielle bears a unique silhouette, and I think we achieved our goal of creating a memorable, atmospheric water dragon. Savage Deviljho, a powerful variant that creates a tense gameplay event without needing to change all that much. Originally, Deviljho was created in Monster Hunter 3 with the idea that it would disrupt high-rank quests and serve as a sort of emergent event. We wanted to retain that feeling in G-rank, and because Deviljho was such a memorable monster, we chose to give it an enhanced variant in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate rather than a subspecies. In Iceborne, there are already many monsters that disrupt Master Rank, but we also felt that players would expect Deviljho to make an appearance too, since it is the highest difficulty. Therefore, we chose to add Savage Deviljho without making major changes to its ecology, event-like nature, and game design. As for gameplay, this Deviljho is consumed by rage, so we gave it powerful attacks while thinking about how to express it being even stronger than a regular individual. After trying various things, we added attacks, such as the one that spits compressed breath into the ground and detonates a massive dragon element blast. In the end, I think we managed to make that initial moment of the Deviljho theme suddenly kicking in during a quest appropriately terrifying, even in Master Rank. Ruiner Nergigante, an enhanced version of Nergigante that has consumed a lot of bioenergy. Nergigante is a very easy to understand and impressive monster with no elements and an aggressive nature. However, I personally always regretted that we didn't have it play a more major role in Monster Hunter World's original story. We always planned for it to eventually have a more impressive showing in Iceborne. But we also did not want to change the established formula of having our flagship monster Velkhana and the final boss Shara Ishvalda be the stars of the story. So instead, we chose to make Ruiner Nergigante the bridge between the story and the Guiding Lands. The variant seen in Iceborne is a different Nergigante than the one seen in the base game, one that has lived for much longer. Nergigante gets stronger the more it feeds, fights, and regenerates, and with this individual, untold years of devouring elder dragons has led to the growth of its brilliant new spikes. Shara Ishvalda, an earth dragon that combines story and gameplay into an impressive two-phase showdown. Just like with Velkhana, we began work on Shara Ishvalda with the desire to create an earth dragon that fits into Monster Hunter. Before long, we were playing with the idea of a golem-like creature made up of earth and rocks. To make it truly feel like a final battle, we decided to design two phases, where the bulky golem-like form transitions into a thinner, Buddha-inspired shape. The first phase is all about breaking parts of the rock armor, and the real fight starts once the armor is shed and Shara Ishvalda reveals its true form in the second phase. We figured that this would make for an engaging finale. Additionally, during the phase transition, the arena crumbles and expands, adding to the sense of scale and drama of the encounter. There is also an idea among the staff that Iceborne's final monster should include a song-like element as a story hook. It wouldn't really fit Monster Hunter if there was a literal singing dragon, so instead we decided to use a more natural sound that could feel like the rumbling of the incoming apocalypse. Since this voice would be carried via air vibrations, this fit nicely with our ideas regarding Shara Ishvalda, specifically working as an extension of how it can vibrate the earth to turn it into sand. As a result, I think the story and design are well connected. Zinogre, a popular monster that arrived in the Guiding Land thanks to player requests. The mega popular Zinogre has appeared in many Monster Hunter games, so we at first felt it should take a break. To be honest, I didn't really plan to include it, so much so that we hadn't even considered any production costs related to it. However, as we announced the main monsters, we kept hearing, I hope Zinogre shows up, and oh, they're definitely going to include Zinogre. So I thought that we should include it after all. Thus, we figured out how to readjust our budget around this last-minute decision. That sequence of events is why Zinogre is not involved in the main plot of Iceborne at all. However, we still wanted its appearance to be interesting. Even though we didn't really establish it prior, we decided to make it appear in the Guiding Lands, and to have it show up as a surprise in the introductory cutscene of that region. Now that I think about it, we sure were lucky that Monster Hunter World already had thunderbugs in the game. Yian Garuga, a powerful presence that spices up the Guiding Lands through overwhelming force. The Guiding Lands were designed to be this mysterious region where all sorts of monsters can appear, So we chose Yian Garuga as an easy to understand but aggressive monster to set the stage for the fights the player will encounter here. It's a reward for those who have played the game a lot, but its violence also presents an increase in difficulty. We wanted the Yian Garuga to feel fast, almost impatient in its attacks, like it cannot wait to destroy you. That is why, for example, we modeled its fire breath after a machine gun barrage. As for the visual design, we didn't want to make too many changes to such a classic monster, so we just gave it more, but thinner, spikes, and refined the body build a bit. Originally, Yian Garuga had been envisioned as an evil Yian visually, and it's a monster that combines many design elements into itself, being a bird wyvern that moves like a flying wyvern. This, alongside its ability to avoid traps, made it a good fit for the chaotic and mysterious Guiding Lands. Scarred Yian Garuga, a grizzled veteran that has survived countless battles. Well, we couldn't have Yian Garuga without the Scarred variant. With how the Guiding Lands are set up, they would inevitably include a tempered Yian Garuga, so for a time we were unsure of how to add Scarred Yian Garuga into the mix. If tempered Yian Garuga are enhanced Yian Garuga, and Scarred Yian Garuga are also enhanced individuals, the power balance becomes all messy. So we decided to include the Scarred Yian Garuga as the tempered form of the regular monster, to avoid confusion and repetition. The Guiding Lands is a land full of danger, so there are likely to be many monsters that can harm Yian Garuga. We didn't change the actual fight and ecology much. It is still a battle-hardened Yian Garuga with countless victories under its belt. This concept is enough to express a sense of raw power. After all, even the regular Yian Garuga can hold its own against Deviljho in the cutscene. There aren't many monsters that can challenge Deviljho in the first place, so that was fun to portray. Brute Tigrex, a volcanic monster with gameplay that revolves around its roars. Iceborne is full of subspecies, and while the main story mostly introduces brand new ones, we wanted to add the familiar subspecies, like Brute Tigrex, into the endgame, as a reward for players who got that far. In order for it to fit into the Guiding Lands, we adjusted its fight to be more challenging. We also knew from the start that the Guiding Lands would get more zones through title updates, so we figured that Brute Tigrex would be able to fit nicely into the volcanic area once it was available. We didn't change its ecology much. It's still a Tigrex that evolved in volcanic regions and has a shell fused with volcanic ash and debris. As for gameplay, base Tigrex revolves around chasing and roaring, so for Brute Tigrex, we wanted to really focus on the roaring. We added various roars, such as charging with a short roar to stop enemies in close range, or a sweeping roar in front of it. It is a true master of weaponizing its voice. Now that I think about it, subspecies used to just be color variations with maybe an additional animation or two, but these days we really put a lot of extra work into their ecology and design, don't we? Gold Rathian, rare species that evolved in special environments, such as unexplored regions. We included both metal wraths for the same reason. Since they have now appeared in quite a few games, many players might not know this, but rare species are supposed to be elusive monsters that emerged in places untouched by humans. For some of them, their very existence is still debated, and their ecology entirely unknown. Therefore, I was adamant about not having them simply roam in areas easily accessible to humans. However, with the creation of the remote Guiding Lands, it seemed like a good opportunity to include them. After all, it is important to motivate players to level up in each area, so I wanted something that would be a goal for that purpose. Rare species are in a special category above subspecies, so the equipment made from the materials is excellent and worth it. They do appear in the Elder's Recess for select quests, but aside from that, I insisted on them being exclusive to the Guiding Lands. Silver Rathalos, The goal was to strengthen the two rare species, with the synergy between the couple as the core. In order to make these rare species stand out among the regular subspecies, we chose to enhance their flame breath. Specifically, we gave the Metal Wraths the ability to activate a red-hot blaze state that empowers their fire immensely. Monster Hunter World made it more feasible to have players fight two monsters simultaneously, which we wanted to make use of for these two. Cooperation has always been a big idea with the Wraths, so for this iteration, we even added an ultimate attack where the two Metal Wraths can make their fire breaths collide to create a bigger explosion. Rathalos and Rathian are very iconic, so we knew that we could let them do some flashy things, within reason, without making them unrecognizable. All in all, we put a great emphasis on the synergy between Gold Rathian and Silver Rathalos. Rathalos and Rathian are monsters that have always evoked the idea of a power couple, and we wanted that impression to be even more pronounced with these rare species, which both evolved in the harshest environments. Rajang, a true warrior worthy of the first title update, provides a high-risk, high-reward encounter. Rajang comes from Monster Hunter DOS, where it was defined by powering up and destroying players with high-risk, high-reward gameplay. While many people have a hard time dealing with Rajang, it has also left a strong impression, for better or worse. For this reason, we knew instantly that Rajang should be the first title update monster. In the refinement phase, we put a big focus on emphasizing Rajang's knuckle walk, so we changed the shape and alignment of its hands and spine. Also, even though it had already existed as a vague rumor among fans, we wanted to properly depict and confirm this monster's relationship to Kirin. In the previous games, Rajang had specific weak spots the player could exploit, such as the rear end. This time, these spots still exist, but the speed and aggression of the beast force players to create their own openings. It's an endgame monster added via update, so we designed it to really test players that had cleared the story mode. Stygian Zinogre, a memorable subspecies that opens the way towards Safi'jiiva. Stygian Zinogre was originally created for Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate with the intention of being a Zinogre that could easily push back and challenge a full multiplayer party of endgame hunters. The base species already looks extremely cool, so we didn't want to make large changes to it. The design team opted to just give it a new color scheme, using black, white, and red. Upon seeing this new design, I remember immediately suggesting that it should use the dragon element. For Iceborne, we went back and redesigned the body shape as well, in accordance with the changes already made to Zinogre. Since Zinogre itself was a last-minute addition, Stygian Zinogre was also designed very late into production. We already knew that Safi'jiiva was going to be the star of the second title update, and wanted a way to make its inclusion feel like a small story arc. So, we decided to have Stygian Zinogre be the monster that leads the player into a surprise encounter with the Red Dragon. While Zinogre is a monster that emerged in the Guiding Lands naturally, Stygian Zinogre was drawn to this land by the influence of Safi'jiiva. Safi'jiiva, Fatalis' counterpart that shifts the player's perspective on what a true dragon is. After playing with it in Monster Hunter World, we wanted to continue the concept of 16-player sieges in Iceborne as well, this time with a greater focus on combat. However, we didn't want it to be inaccessible to less experienced players, so we added a mechanic where all players contribute just by fighting and exhausting Safi'jiiva, even if they don't fully succeed on every hunt. The timing of the siege was chosen to spice up the endgame with more options. The awakened weapons presented a different goal to work towards instead of the usual grind for materials, and added more variety. We hoped that it would make players stick around for longer. In terms of design, we wanted to surprise players with a look at what Safi'jiiva becomes when it isn't slain in its juvenile state, while also creating a counterpart to Fatalis. However, we didn't want to stick to a black color scheme like we had in the past for powerful dragons, so I asked the team to come up with designs based on the prompt Red Dragon instead. I was looking for a design that mostly resembled a classic dragon, but with faint glows that echo back to Safi'jiiva, and enough unique elements to make it memorable despite its familiar silhouette. Furious Rajang, the kind of challenge only possible through title updates. By the time Title Update 3 was intended to release, we expected players to have raised their skill levels significantly, so we wanted to challenge them properly. We also knew that Furious Rajang was a requested monster. Like all modernized monsters, we expected to have to make a few adjustments to its ecology, but since it doesn't have a specific habitat anyway, and the endgame revolved around the Guiding Lands, where all sorts of monsters gather regardless of ecology, it was easier to fit it in than expected. In Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, Furious Rajang was conceptualized as an empowered version of an already invincible creature that appeared out of nowhere, so we kind of ended up repeating that here. And of course, Furious Rajang was also chosen partially because with Rajang already in the game, it was bound to be an easier inclusion. Also, since these individuals are transformed by their rage into iconic golden berserkers after losing their tails, which regulate their mental stability, players are likely to recognize them as powerful enough to justify their late game inclusion. I'm sure most people are familiar with power-ups like these from manga. Nowadays, when you think of Rajang, you probably picture it gold, rather than black. Raging Brachydios, using limited resources to create a hard-hitting monster and an epic showdown. As development began focusing on Alatreon and later Fatalis, there was this hesitation to commit to big ideas, since we might not have the time and resources to fully create them. However, thanks to Safi'jiiva's awakened weapons, players were going to be stronger than ever, so we wanted to include a real combat spectacle, which is how we landed on using the mighty Raging Brachydios. We had to consider its ecology, however, since Raging Brachydios' flashpoint slime can only emerge in special volcanoes. Sure, the Elder's Recess has lava, but its main arena is already taken by Teostra. In the end, we figured that the depths of the Guiding Lands would be a special enough place for the flashpoint slime to be present. Furious Rajang is a fight about lightning-quick bursts of violence, so for its companion release, we wanted Raging Brachydios to instead be a brutal battle of attrition that culminates in one final showdown. By having the monster seal off any escape routes at the end, the intensity of the fight crescendos into a deadly clash. I thought that this would be interesting from a production standpoint, and I wanted players to experience both their newfound strength as well as the rising threat level of the endgame monsters. Frostfang Barioth, an elderly variant that has adapted to survive and control the ice. This Barioth variant was born out of the idea of a grizzled old Barioth, so we gave it shaggy fur and frozen tusks, to sell this sense of looking at a resilient elder who has survived many hardships. We also made its fur more silvery, to emphasize that this creature could only develop in the iciest of regions. In terms of gameplay, we designed it to use its ice breath to hinder the player's positioning, while itself being more mindful and strategic in its movements compared to the hectic regular Barioth. However, as I'm sure some players noticed, Frostfang Barioth was too weak and pitiful, considering that it was released alongside Alatreon. It was, in fact, planned to release much earlier, but the impact of the coronavirus pandemic affected production considerably. It was a monster that left us with some regrets, but I've heard some people say that it was a breath of fresh air after a string of difficult fights. so I think it turned out well in the end. Alatreon, a symbol of destruction, a master of elements, and the culmination of Iceborne's gameplay philosophy. Alatreon originates from Monster Hunter Tri, and stands above all Elder Dragons, just like Fatalis. While most Elder Dragons command one element, Alatreon is the master of all of them. This superior position, as well as its design, have made it quite popular, and there was demand to see it in future games. Additionally, Alatreon was originally designed and created by Yuya Tokuda, who directed the base game of Monster Hunter World, and during production, we toyed with the idea to include Alatreon in high rank already. For various reasons, this was not possible, so we decided to instead save it for Iceborne. In past games, which elements Alatreon controlled would depend on if it was grounded or in the air, but for this redesign, we instead made it alternate on a set cycle. Dragon Element was chosen as a buffer state to encourage strategic combat, where players focus on preventing Alatreon from switching into a disadvantageous element. Furthermore, we created the Eschaton Judgment as an ultimate move that would ramp up the tension, to truly make players feel like they are staring down a forbidden being. Basically, Alatreon embodies the central philosophy of Iceborne, an expansion all about mastering the elements. Fatalis, one final challenge that overwhelms players with many new attacks. The end of Monster Hunter World was marked by various collaborations, and while I was grateful for that, there was a sense of regret that we didn't end the game with one of our own monsters. Around that time, a visual for the series' 15th anniversary showed off an updated Fatalis design, and many players began speculating that this must mean we'll definitely be adding it to Monster Hunter World. Seeing this desire, and remembering our regrets, we decided to include Fatalis right at the end, and go all out in the process. Much of Iceborne was flashy, with monsters that utilized various gimmicks that the player had to navigate around, but for Fatalis, we wanted to bring the gameplay back down to its core. We redesigned the fight to have a multitude of physical and fire attacks, which all require precision and anticipation to evade effectively. It's a challenging fight that tests the player's raw skill one last time. Since we wanted to go out with a bang, we also redesigned Castle Shrade and incorporated its structure into the gameplay, such as adding the gate that can protect players from Fatalis' ultimate fire attack. And that is all there is in terms of monster design notes for Iceborne. The Monster Hunter team is a real joy to research like this, and I hope you learned something new about your favorite monster today. The Rise and Sunbreak books have similar notes like these, so let me know if you'd like to see a video on those too. But for now, thanks for watching, take care. A thank you as well to all of my lovely patrons who support the channel. I want to especially thank Morgul Blank, Tacti-Wolf, Thyla Zero, Glitchy, Jacob Coleman, Hellbug Hunter, Shebo, M1Have12, Regal Eagle, Wronger97, Quali, Elzendo Carlo, Matt Hat 124, My Name Gone, The Dollarfish, King Dre, Ryan Hook, Veroxus, Thick, Kuroneko, Zion HV Augenson, AJ Rivera, Alistair, Jacob Denumnut, Soruka, Sir Newt, Evie, Rambling Robin, Hashi, Black Ace 202, Dissy, Hubbo Himbro Mirror, Magenta, Arcturian 711, Russell, Vulgar Beast, Person 212, Claire Miboon, Oakwood Tree, Mr. Pyramid, Makot02, Geo, Jamie Tate, Nils Schlatter, Iron Camel, and Nah, I'm going to bed. Take care everyone, see you around.